You've Ruined My Life, Professor Craig. That's the title of the letter. And that was written to you in our question and answer forum at reasonablefaith.org, Dr. Craig. Many, in fact, are saying, including myself, this is the greatest letter in the question and answer forum on Reasonable Faith. Now, there are some great ones in there, not to diminish any of them, but there's something about this one that is very compelling. Rather than read the whole thing, we're going to kind of look at highlights here because I want to encourage people to go to the website and look at this letter, You've Ruined My Life, Professor Craig. Did this really strike you as a letter that was had a lot of compelling content?
Oh, it really did. Jan was the one who read it first and then forwarded it to me and said, look at this letter from this fellow named Adam. And it's a long letter, but as I read it, I just grew more and more wide-eyed to see how what I think is evident, that God is really at work in this fellow's life. And the degree of philosophical training that he has and his insights into the arguments, I thought, set him apart from and above many of the popular level sorts of non-theistic responses that we often get.
I want to say from the outset, Bill, that many people who follow Reasonable Faith have looked into this writer and have found him to be genuine, and that this was not a sophisticated troll, to use the vernacular of the internet, that this wasn't a fake. Because immediately there were some skeptics who said, this is a fake, this is too good to be true. This reads like a movie script, you know. That's
a good idea.
Now, there is a point there to all this. We do have to be careful.
Yes.
The internet contains a lot of disinformation, not just bad information, as well as good information.
Right. I have been suckered more than once by things on the internet that I thought were authentic and then found out later they were not.
Yeah. We get accused quite often of lying for Jesus, as it's called. There's even a website, I think, Lying for Jesus, and it tries to catch people who think that they're somehow justified to lie. So there are many aspects to this letter, but his love of philosophy and the fact that he considered himself an evangelical atheist, evangelistic atheist, proclaiming the good word of rationality. He says, my beliefs were strident at best, intolerant at worst. He thought he had the God question all figured out. He applied in college to get an MA program at CSULA. He got accepted.
Which is Cal State University, Los Angeles.
Yeah, and but the real sticking point seemed to be your essay on the absurdity of life without God. He said, here you were telling me my life as a direct result of my worldview was worthless in every possible way. Well, as an ambitious philosophy student, I could not simply let you get away with this. Your objections to atheism needed answers, and so he really wrestled with your paper. And he went on. He did come to the conclusion that nihilism is unlivable. He quotes Christopher Hitchens. This letter is very detailed. What do you think was his frustration? What began to emerge as his frustration? He didn't want to be a nihilist, apparently.
No, but I think he began to be convinced that the arguments of the so-called new atheists who want to try to preserve objective meaning, value, and purpose in life were ultimately failures. And I really appreciated so much what he says in the paragraph, that he says, I need to say how disappointed I am in the new atheists and moreover the professional philosophers who do not understand the moral argument for God's existence. Why can't they comprehend the ontology of values? Why is this so difficult? This is something that has baffled me as well, Kevin. the obviously wrong sort of responses to this argument where people think you're saying you can't know right from wrong without believing in God, or that belief in God is necessary to live the moral life. Just clearly a misunderstanding of the argument. People ought to know better. And I appreciate what he said. He goes on to say, I'm sorry, I just had to rant a little because it bothers me when philosophers who should know better don't comprehend the moral argument. I can only imagine how frustrated you must feel. Further, I hate all the nasty comments you get on YouTube. People don't even understand how well thought out your views are. So he said, sorry, I just wanted to say that you have at least one atheist on your side, sir. Well, that was very gratifying, I think, to hear.
Yes. 90% of the negative comments are sour grapes, very petty, and thoughtful people know it. But it's just everywhere. It's very lowbrow, and he gets frustrated with that. And I know a lot of non-believers who are frustrated with that as well, because they're not interacting accurately. He says, philosophically, I agree with almost everything you say, not in a follower sense, but in that I find what you say either convincingly true, or I find I come to the same conclusions that you do with regards to particular ideas that I have reasoned through on my own. He says, with that said, I'm still an atheist. Well, how is that possible? How could my favorite philosopher be a Christian? I agree with almost everything he says, yet I am an atheist. He says, well, it seems that you make an extremely strong case for the rationality of an abstract notion of God. I'm not sure what he meant by that, because you don't teach that God is abstract.
No. Now, he has that in scare quotes, the word abstract. And I think what he means by that is God as a sort of philosophical conclusion, but not as an experiential or existential reality in your life, not something that changes your life. And so he can't seem to make that step from the head to the heart, I think, perhaps.
Yeah, he says, I'm an atheist who hates atheism, you know? I want there to be a God. Yeah, I just can't, more than anything, yet I cannot get myself to believe. And bottom line, Bill, he says, what do you suggest that I do? You know, I mean.
Yeah, he even says, Kevin, this is strange, I know the answer is Christianity. He knows it. But he said, I can't get myself to believe it's truth. So this is a real existential dilemma here. He doesn't need more arguments, I think. He's already, I think, got enough arguments to know that God exists and even that Christianity is true. But there needs to be that existential engagement on Adam's part with God as a real reality in his life.
He says, P.S., do me one favor, even if you never have time to respond, please do not debate Lawrence Krauss anymore. Anyway, he says, as with most people not trained in philosophy, it's not even an argument in any sort of philosophical sense.
Yeah, he doesn't need to worry. I am not going to engage Professor Krauss in another dialogue, because I thought it was just utterly unprofitable.
This hits so many raw nerves, especially among atheists. So many of my friends, nothing makes them angrier than the fact that they are told that they are consigned to nihilism. Now, the other thing that makes them angry is that you can't be moral, you know, without a belief in God, and we straighten that out.
Right.
You know, we do. But this whole thing about don't consign me to nihilism because I'm not a nihilist.
Yeah.
And he says, yes, you are.
Or you should be.
Or you should be.
You're inconsistent with your worldview. And in fact, I argue that it's really impossible to live consistently and happily within the framework of an atheistic worldview. So that if you want to be happy, you're going to do what your friends do, and that is to live inconsistently. You make a leap of faith and affirm, objective values, meaning, and purpose for your life, even though you don't have any basis for it. And as for being consigned to nihilism, this is a claim that isn't emanating simply from Christians or theists. This is what many atheists themselves say, and I'm thinking of people like Nietzsche, Russell, Sartre, and then on the contemporary scene, people like Joel Marx, Alex Rosenberg, and others who have the courage of their convictions to say what atheism frankly leads to. So this is not a sort of accusation that one can pin on theists. This is an implication that many atheists themselves recognize.
Yeah. Now, when you began to answer him, you said, first of all, Adam, you kind of remind me of the same route that C.S. Lewis took.
Yes, in preparing for the C.S. Lewis Memorial Conference last year at Westminster Abbey, I read Lewis's biography by Alistair McGrath and recalled some of Lewis's writings. And it struck me how similar Adam's experience is to C.S. Lewis's. Lewis was a scientific naturalist for much of his life. He really thought that all that exists is what's given to us by the natural sciences, but he found that utterly dreadful and such a worldview unlivable and pointless, meaningless. He, as a professor of literature, loved fantasy and imagination and fiction. And his dilemma was that everything that he thought was real left him empty and hollow, and everything that he loved, his intellect told him was imaginary. And so how could he come to terms with this? And I think that Lewis's autobiography would be a real help to Adam. And so that was one of the things that I recommend that he do. Read Lewis's Surprised by Joy and see how Lewis made that gradual transition from naturalism to theism, and then finally from theism to Christianity.
Second thing you said is to seek experiences that put you in touch with the transcendent. You need to escape the cloying bonds of naturalism by catching glimpses of a transcendent reality beyond the material world. This will help to prepare your heart for belief in God. So open yourself to experiences of sublime beauty. Now, you suggest several things here. Bill, I want to throw one in.
Okay.
One thing that I would encourage a person in Adam's position and many Christians as well, take a sabbatical from the internet and the online forums and the heat of all the debates, because you know, there's a community there and you feel compelled that you've got all these threads unanswered and these posts unanswered and you can't leave them dangling. You got to go back, and you can literally become distracted by the heat of all this coming at you.
Yeah.
Take a sabbatical from it. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
do like Paul and stay away 3 years if you have to.
Yeah,
You know,
this was
I mean,
something that Pascal recognized as well in talking to the libertines of his day, that the way in which we escape dealing with these deep questions of meaning in life and the existence of God is by cluttering our lives with distractions. And I think you're absolutely right, Kevin.
Yeah, I'm interacting with some people now who I think are close to receiving Christ, who are real heavy into the forums and debating.
Yeah.
And my advice is, okay, you know, I want you to receive Christ and so on, and then I don't want to see you on here for a year. Send me an email or a text, but stay out of it for a year as a means of discipleship. Now, that's general, but I just think it's a good principle.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
You go on.
What I was trying to highlight here was another lesson that really comes out of Lewis's life, is to realize that things like beautiful music and art and other experiences where we grasp the beautiful put us in contact with a kind of transcendent reality beyond scientific naturalism. Scientific naturalism can give you a description of the sunset in terms of the refraction of the light rays through the atmosphere and the dust and the geology of the surrounding countryside and so forth. But it can't do anything to capture the beauty of the sunset. And so if we can capture glimpses of this transcendent realm of beauty and value, I think this will prepare our hearts for a transcendent reality like God.
You recommended some symphonies and some other things. What did you recommend?
Well, I recommended Dvorak's New World Symphony, which I think is just beautiful, and then Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade, which has this violin that just weeps. It is so gorgeous when this refrain comes on with the violin. I find this kind of music just sublime. But of course, everyone has his own favorites,
Sure,
I think.
sure.
But these were just some suggestions for Adam.
Sure, and you're being one-on-one with him now.
Yeah, very much so.
In this. You said also for him to read the Gospels afresh. Go back to Jesus and the character of Jesus.
Right. There's tremendous attraction in this man, Jesus of Nazareth, in the authenticity of his life. Such a courageous and bold man who faced his own death because of his radical personal claims and commitments and teachings. There's real authenticity here. And then there is wonderful wisdom as well. He was a really smart guy who confounded the religious leaders of his day. And I think reading the Gospels, reading the life of Jesus, can again really open one up to the truth of Christianity.
After that, you said, go ahead and supplement the power of that with some resources that bolster the historical grounds for the resurrection. You gave
Right. One of the things that I noticed about Adam's question was he showed a familiarity with philosophical arguments for theism, but there was almost nothing in the letter that suggested that he had explored the historical credibility of the New Testament records of the life of Jesus, and particularly the central miracle of the New Testament, his resurrection from the dead. And so I think Adam would do well to look into that. It really is quite remarkable, as I've said before, that the central facts that undergird the inference to the resurrection of Jesus are accepted by the majority of historical Jesus scholars today, whether they be evangelical, non-evangelical, Christian, Jewish, or secular.
You gave him two more bits of advice. One, number 5, embark on a spiritual experiment. Begin to pray daily. Attend a church where the gospel is faithfully preached and you can be with Christians and get to know them. And you kind of, do I see you saying, Bill, you're kind of saying, go ahead and just put the ball in God's court for a while. Give God a chance to...
Right. It may sound funny for an agnostic to pray to God, but I see no reason why an open agnostic cannot say, God, if you're there, lead me to yourself. Show me the way, and hope that that prayer will be answered. And I think that this is the way in which one begins to open oneself to this transcendent spiritual reality, and to recognize your need of forgiveness and moral renovation by God.
The final bit of advice.
Right. Was to get a copy of Francis Thompson's poem, The Hound of Heaven. I think that it describes so beautifully Adam himself, someone who is running from God, and God is like this relentless hound pursuing him, after him, no matter where he goes, what he does. This hound is on his tracks and will not let him go until he finally recognizes in God that here is all that I've been longing for and never realized it. And although Francis Thompson's poem is very sophisticated literarily. It's in a sense archaic in its poetry. If you take the time to read it and meditate on it, I think it's just a beautiful poem about God's relentless pursuit of a lost soul until that person recognizes in God the fulfillment of human existence.
We'll follow up on this letter, and you can get the entire transcript of the letter and Dr. Craig's answer when you go to reasonablefaith.org and click on the question and answer session.